It's where we came out and we said, we can go get bigger customers than everyone else in the hosted space because we don't have a per seat licensing fee at the time, right? We had a, concurrent call session model. So you look at that and you go, I can go provide 1,000 users service and no one can compete with me.
Rick Garcia, you are the founder of G12 Communications, as I understand. Is that? Am I saying this correctly, or am I butchering your title?
No, I'm the founder. On LinkedIn, I show I'm the COO, but it's I've dropped the COO stuff because we've hired smarter people than me now. So now I literally get to go focus on driving revenue. So my goal is to drive revenue, create new products for the organization, right? And I have a CEO. He's my business partner, so he's in charge of, accounting, finance, and all the stuff that I don't particularly like. But product and sales, I love that stuff, and so that's what I do. I like to drive products into the marketplace.
So I think that title is now called a CPO. You're the Chief Product Officer, right?
So revenue is my primary goal. So I'm keeping the CRO. So it's driving the revenue.
I had an executive at a company, and his title, he had this acronym, and it was I don't remember the letters, but it was VP of all things not covered by other VPs.
That's fantastic. That's great.
and it was just the initials, right, of all the different things, like VP, and it was like, what the heck is this?
Whatever. That's hilarious. Other things, OT.
VP of all things not covered by other
that's
VPs.
Great.
And I was like, okay, cool. I get it. I know. What
I should just put janitor. Let me just go clean things up, right?
Oh, that's the other one, right? What was the other one I read a long time ago? It was like being the founder and CEO is always sucking at your job. Because until you can figure out how to hire better people than you have to do the job, and it's not the job that you know.
That's 100% accurate. That is 100% accurate. I was a technologist. I mean, I was the one that launched all of our technology stuff initially. Didn't know anything about servers at the time or anything like that. And I'm in a data center sticking servers in, going, where does this go? Where does that go? And I contracted help at the very beginning. It was terrible. And so from technology to product and to, support and sales and all of it. I'm a salesperson by trade. Like that's what I love to do. And so I ended up doing all that stuff and then operationally running, stuff from an operations perspective. And then I was like, oh boy, we need some smart people. So it was fantastic to be able to hire, 2015, start hiring a bunch of people. And
So what, let's go to inception. Like, what is the inception of G12? As you say, if you're like a salesperson starting a technology company, what was the market opportunity that you saw, and like what pushed you into, where did G12 come from?
So here's how we started. We were my co-founder, and he's our CEO, Rick Coma, and myself. So we were both the guys that built a company called 360 Networks. And at 360 Networks, we were the wholesale provider for guys like Vonage, 8x8, Google Voice, J2 Global, who's EFAX. So we were the providers, the underlying telco providers for those organizations. So we built a wholesale network in 36 different states, a wholesale CLEC network, right? We were the fiber infrastructure, the switching infrastructure, and we were the CLEC. So we sold that to Zayo in 2011. So when we sold that to Zayo, prior to the close of that deal, it happened in December of 2011, October, we started talking about, starting a different business or a business. And so I started G12, I think it was October 31st, 2011. And he joined after the close of Zayo, in December of 2011. And so we started G12 Communications then. But it was just because we knew the market, right? All of the cloud providers at the time were our customers. And we came out of the gate as a UCaaS provider and mostly a SIP trunking provider back then. Like back then, there was a lot of SIP trunking still to go deploy in the market, right? To Cisco's, Avaya's, ShoreTel's, Mitel's, et cetera. So it was a SIP trunking operation predominantly. Cloud started to take root, started to take hold in the marketplace. And then we slowly converted from SIP trunking to our cloud offering. And that's kind of where we started. It was cloud and SIP for a long time.
So today, would you say you're predominantly focused on Teams? Are you still offering SIP trunking and
we do,
other UCaaS?
Here's what's interesting. This is great because you see this shift from SIP trunking to cloud PBX to Microsoft Teams. So this path that we've followed has led us to Microsoft Teams. But what we do, I mean, our core was always SIP trunking early on, and we still sell SIP trunking today. It's shocking to me. But as an example, we do a lot of SIP trunking for call centers. So if you have a call center provider like a Five9's, TalkDesk's, Genesys, in Contact, we've got connectivity between us all, right? So we've got private trunks built to each of those contact center providers. And so a customer will come to us and say, you're providing my hosted PBX service, and now I want a fancier call center solution. Can you do my dial tone into this? So we end up doing SIP trunking into those platforms and bringing that together, right? And bring the dial tone provider for both the contact center solution and their cloud PBX solution. So that's how we continue to sell that product. Our cloud PBX, obviously, it started to take hold from a market, sort of standardization early. And I would say 2017, 2018, 2019, it started to really take hold, right? But people were still deploying SIP for their Ciscos at the time. But then the pandemic hit. And just prior to the pandemic, we were literally testing the Teams integration. I think about 4 months prior to the pandemic, we were testing our Teams integration for our cloud PBX. And that was across some audio codes that we had deployed and things like that. And so the integration was working well. And really before we were like, yay, team, right before an announcement, the pandemic sort of started and we were like, well, we're already running this. Internally, we were running it. So we're like, this is a great solution. And so that led us into our, from SIP to Cloud PBX with Microsoft Teams. And then we did direct routing between all that stuff. So we started doing some direct routing because we have an audio codes infrastructure that we had deployed. And then we went to Operator Connect because we were doing direct routing. We worked with Microsoft to deploy our Operator Connect solution. Microsoft, kind of, I'll say, anointed us, in their in their ecosystem, their Operator Connect ecosystem, which was great. And that's kind of where we're at. So we're still focused on all things because here's the deal: when we deploy Teams solutions, they still require some ancillary services sometimes, right? That deliver a full solution. Okay, so whether it's analog devices for overhead paging or door actuators or intercoms, right? Fax lines or stuff like that, and then or if you
all of those stuff that every enterprise needs and they forget about until you go do it.
Yeah, if you're not a knowledge worker facility, if you're not a knowledge worker organization, right, and you're take a hospital. If you're a facility, well, you've got the red phones on every floor, right? And those are all typically run on analog lines that congregate in the 66 block down in the basement of the hospital. How are you going to turn those on to SIP? You know what I mean? You can, and you'd need some ad trans. We've got a hospital where we've got a daisy chained 11 ad trans that we support for these red phones throughout this massive hospital, right? But that's the kind of stuff where you couldn't possibly try to put that on Teams, right? So you need some ancillary services. So when we go to market and we go to an organization that has 500 or 600 users, whatever it is, that's great. But then they invariably they'll have some solution that needs a legacy type service that we bring into the fold.
From a technology standpoint, I think it's surprising how many providers are not actually in control of their own integration with Teams. And this is one of those things where, there was a big run by the UCaaS market into supporting Teams. But then you start peeling back the onion a little bit and you find out how many of them are dependent on like Click to Teams, as their integration layer. So, I think AudioCodes, Ribbon, and I forget the other SBC are like the only real certified pathways into being a true Teams provider. So, I mean, already having AudioCodes SBCs obviously gave you guys quite an advantage and a leg up into that.
Yeah, I did. And that's, again, starting down that path early on led us into, okay, here's some, and it is some trial and error, right? Because we picked up some software from AudioCodes early on, and that software really wasn't the right market fit. It's like, you can have a partner layer, then you can have the customer layer. So it really took some trial and error to kind of get that product set right. So, a portal for our Teams integration attached to our Cloud PBX solution. and then a completely separate sort of software package for our Operator Connect platform. So yeah, it does. It takes a little bit. It's interesting how when you go to market, you envision what this should look like, and then you go to market, and the market pressures go, no, this is what we're looking for, and you have to go back and retool. And this is one of the reasons why I look at some large organizations. I go, there's just no possible way they'll be really successful because they're not able to retool and be nimble and pivot when they need to, right? From a technology perspective. And so that's kind of what's exciting about what we're doing.
So, I mean, with the AutoCodes SPCs, did you build your own PBX platform? Did you go out and license a BroadSoft?
No. So we're a NetSapient shop. So obviously everybody knows NetSapient. So we've been in NetSapient, 2011. And this is funny because, you're asking me about the founding of G12, and it was interesting. I just remembered too, because we started October. I remember signing for the NetSapiens deal, on my own at the time, October 31st. It was Halloween night, 2011. And I was on the phone with Anand, who's the CEO of NetSapiens. Yeah. And he's like, I need signatures today. I'm like, are you serious? You need signatures today? So I remember feeling like I was signing away my life at the time. Now, we had sold, 360, and I knew I was getting some a pop of income, a pop of money. So I was like, okie dokie, we're signing away. Let's go.
So NetSapiens, I probably signed a deal with them right around the same era, had and still probably has one of the best phone provisioning platforms out of all these systems you can go out. And if you haven't actually tried to configure, Polycoms or Yelinks and do auto provisioning at scale, you don't really appreciate how much of a pain this actually is. And their platform was very good at doing that. It was in even today's market, when you look at, the open source world doesn't really exist around this. There's a lot of really good like Camilio and OpenSARE, OpenSIPs. Take your version of name you want to call it, that's really good at, at doing, session management and routing. But then that, of course, introduces strange things for you if you're a service provider, because you don't get a good, sane, billing record out of these platforms. So I'm not going to go too far down that rabbit hole. I'll get too nerdy.
But I'll tell you, that's one of the reasons I told you early on. I was a sales guy, right? And I needed something that was completed and where I didn't have to, bundle in any additional platforms. You take a BroadSoft platform, you had to bundle in, call trace, a call trace platform, right? You had to put a call, at the time it was like Call Hammer. That was like the big one at the time, right? So you had to put a Call Hammer attached to a BroadSoft. That was just to give you call traces and a SIP ladder. Right. And then not to mention device provisioning. So there was a lot of different components you'd have to put into a BroadSoft. So when I looked at NetSapiens, I looked at Metaswitch and I looked at NetSapiens and then BroadSoft at the time. Mm-hmm. I'm like, NetSapiens had this complete bundle. They weren't as large, but they had this complete bundle that allowed me to do everything I needed to do. And for me, being a non-technology guy, their UI was not completed yet. I remember building my first auto attendant, and it was like, at 4678 / star, and I was just like, how am I ever going to scale this business like that? That's it. And
the admin interface for managing the auto attendants versus their operator interface is just completely night and day difference. BroadSoft. We ran BroadSoft for a while. Show me a phone provider and tell me their underlying, infrastructure, and I'll tell you what their cost structure is and where they're going to break, right? And for a while, BroadSoft was just what you had to run because it was the only thing that was out there. But at scale, you're still talking about $6, $7, $8 per seat as a base cost for licensing. When I talk with companies that are pushing into a UCaaS space based on BroadSoft, and you look at where the market pressure is going, you're just like, how do you there's no margin for you to survive in this.
It's where we came out and we said we can go get bigger customers than everyone else in the hosted space because we don't have a per seat licensing fee at the time, right? We had a concurrent call session model. So you look at that and you go, I can go provide 1,000 users service and no one can compete with me.
Yeah, it's obviously it was a good choice. So how much, One of the things I look at and I think about a lot with these platforms is just what kind of like R&D are they investing in with the push to mobile? I mean, there's a lot of companies that still want to have phones on desks, and they're really physical phone centric environments. You talk about hospitals, roaming users, all these sorts of things. And then you have this other pressure around mobile users, cell phone based, soft phone on a desktop, these sorts of things. And I feel like that's, I mean, of course, Microsoft bundling Teams in with Office 365, really just sucked all the oxygen out of the room for a lot of people. When you're talking with organizations now and you're going through this process of like, are you a hosted PBX, a cloud PBX customer, or are you a Teams customer? What are you seeing in market, and what is that conversation looking like?
Well, that's exactly. I mean, you I think you hit it right. I mean, we go to market. This is again what makes us a bit unique. We have an understanding, because we come from the UCaaS space. So you have an understanding of what companies need from a facility perspective. And then you understand what Microsoft Teams can deploy, because now we've hired more and more Microsoft Teams people here. And so you look at it and you go, and this is where my job is interesting, because I look at it and go, let's go take a look at what Teams can do, and how does it look from a deployment perspective, and how does an organization use it? And then how does that compare to my UCaaS solution? So literally, I did a video the other day on why someone would choose UCaaS versus Teams, right? And so what I do, literally, we take it and we go, here's the UCaaS option, and here are your pros and cons, and here's the Teams option, and here are your pros and cons. They're exactly the same price. Which one do you want? And we have that. That's where we have really tight controls over what we deliver. And we understand our cost structure. Again, we come from the wholesale space, right? So we understand cost structure. And so we're able to lay out, what's better for this, for this. I'll give you an example. I spoke to a government agency yesterday, and this government agency had a Microsoft, they called it a Microsoft moment is what they had, right? A Microsoft moment where some sort of update was pushed and it took, a couple hours for it to get resolved. And so they are so shy, or so gun shy, where they're just like, we can't pull the trigger on a phone system in Microsoft Teams. So we want your UCaaS plus Teams. It's a great example. Mm-hmm. I don't know that it's if it's valid, because I'll tell you, I mean, at some point, everyone's going to have a hiccup, right? I mean, understand that people are concerned about going down, but Microsoft increased their SLA to 4 nines, right? I mean, that's 53 minutes of downtime a year. So you look at that and you go, all right, that's 53 minutes of downtime. But here are the options for you. I'll lay them both out. And that's the beautiful thing about it. You can go to market and you go, which one do you want? There's some great benefits to both. Which one is right for your organization?
Microsoft seat licensing for their PBX was very expensive. I mean, originally at $12 per named user just to add the PBX functionality onto Teams. This conversation starting around like, oh, we're going to save money by using Teams for voice, and then you actually start running down the spreadsheet of what it would actually cost. And you're like, this is nowhere near saving you money in terms of like an actual seat cost. Maybe it's saving you money from an admin and deployment standpoint, but it's not saving you money in terms of cost. Now, fortunately, Microsoft changed that pretty significantly, which changes the cost equation. I mean, as we're recording this, Microsoft is having a pretty big cloud outage. I don't know if you guys have seen this yet, but it does happen. Some of the complaints I've seen with Teams are just things like, and this one was, when I first heard it, was surprising for me, I guess, in the sense of like, it's such like a contrarian thought, but I've had a lot of clients deploy Teams that then are looking for a way to unplug from the external world and only be responsive to internal team, to internal, to their company. Right. And voice enabling Teams then immediately kills that ability for you of being able to say, hey, I'm not answering my phone for the next hour, but if I get a chat message from somebody that I need to be responsive to, I can be responsive to them. And that was a very interesting one for me when I started seeing that. I wasn't really expecting that, because I mean, again, everything's convergence, unified. And you kind of fall into that trap pretty easily. And then you find out like, no, I want to unplug my phone and not answer any phone calls for the next 4 hours, but I need to still be on Teams because people need to reach me, right? Like, what do you do?
Interesting. We run into that every now and then. You take like software development firms, right? It's like if they need to. It's I was on with a consulting firm, actually, not even software development, but I was on with a consulting firm not too long ago, and that consulting firm they used Zoom and Google, and they said everything that we do from a PSTN perspective, we just basically set meetings. So everything's a meeting. Everything's collaboration. Okay. So they don't do they don't have PSTN coming in from, in their phone system. And they just use mobile if they need to use mobile, which is their cell phones, just normal cell phones. But the majority of their business, they said, is all scheduled meetings, which is interesting because you do see the collaboration time increasing, right? And you see the PSTN traffic decreasing. Right, if you look at it from an aggregated standpoint of customers, and it's because people are booking meetings more. I find it really difficult, though. I think some select businesses can do that and operate that way. But if you're at the, I feel like if you're at the mercy of the public, right, and you want customers, you've got to find a way to ingest calls from the external world.
Yeah, those. I know a lot of these. It's the same thing. We give everybody cell phones, so they just give everybody out their cell phone numbers, and that's how they talk. I mean, there is a certain amount of video fatigue that kicks in. Like, it's nice to be on a phone call for me personally. Like, I actually like talking on the phone versus being on video always. But where I've seen these things fall over, really, it's like Bob or Susie leave the company, and they were the AE or AM for an account, and then there's no contact information that's available, and that cell phone's turned off, sitting in a drawer or in transit somewhere, and you've got a client that can't get a hold of you. That's a pretty big problem. Customer support, like people like calling people on for support. So it's, but this goes back. I mean, a lot of this also stems back. You say like consulting or software development. I can remember like 20 years ago. And one of the big things was, do not allow any external callers to call any of the people in the software development teams. Like, recruiters were just calling, like doing like war dialing of extensions, looking for software developers to answer and be like, hey, are you interested in a new job? And so then it became this mandate of, we had to figure out how to like effectively disconnect all these stations from being able to receive inbound phone calls, which was then of course very strange too. Like, it's everything always boils down to a business problem at some point, right? It's
100% it does. And that's it. It's funny. I mean, that's exactly right. It comes down to a business process or a business sort of, what sort of business process can we help? Like, what are you trying to accomplish, right? That's what it all comes down to, is how do we make a business more efficient, more productive, a better experience for your customers? Those are things that I think it just all boils down to.
So let's talk about direct routing versus operator connect. Thank you, Microsoft, for creating even more confusion in the marketplace for this product. Why would you deploy direct routing versus operator connect now if you're going to voice enable?
Good question. There's a couple of things that you'll need to, like, for context here, right? Direct routing was the first thing that was deployed, right? It's a whole separate set of APIs associated with, or not APIs, but just whole separate set of, infrastructure for direct routing to dive into Teams or to get into the Teams environment, right? And it was deployed it was deployed by the partners. Right. So if you think about, they needed something to bring voice in, they gave a product to the partners, so the partners can go deploy this voice service. And what the partners do is, they'll deploy an SBC and, deliver, take SIP from, as an example, the existing PBX there and tie it into the Microsoft Teams infrastructure, right? And now the customer has their physical phone system and Microsoft Teams. So when I think of direct routing and I explain it to people, I explain to them that, obviously you could just put an SBC in and tie it directly to Teams. You still need trunking, right? So you still need your dial tone provider. So you look at that and I tell people, like, if your phone system, and this is kind of the biggest differentiator for me that I explain to people, if your phone system, your existing phone system, and the investment that you have in that, take again a hospital as an example, they've got 6,000 Cisco 7960s or 40s still lying around, and a call manager that is limping along. Okay, but they're paying licensing on everything, by the way, right? So. Yep. you take that infrastructure and you go, I still need this to run for another few years. Okay. And give me a couple more years out of the Cisco phone system. And yet we absolutely need Teams. So then you can go deploy an SBC, and it's going to be, and what do you care at that point? If you've got a Cisco call manager infrastructure, you don't care about throwing in a one USBC or a couple of one USBCs, right? So or if you've got a big virtual machine, you throw it on a virtual machine, right? So you go get your SBC, you license your SBC for direct routing. Your SBC then ties right into Microsoft Teams. I'm going to use a dial tone from my Cisco call manager. Maybe I throw in a Cisco cube to shoot a dial tone right over to my my new SBC, whether it be ribbon or audio codes, right? So, and I've got a partner that's deploying all this for me because it's really, really complex, right? So that's what I'm doing. So I look at it and go, direct routing, is important if you need to keep that infrastructure, and it's going to be really expensive because not only you still have your telco, your normal telco you're paying for, but now you've got licensing for an SBC, support for an SBC. You've got the one-time cost of an SBC plus the professional services, because you need pro services to deploy SBCs. You need it. So that's direct routing. That's how I explain direct routing to organizations. If you're Microsoft, you're just going, it's a whole separate set of infrastructure components. That's what it boils down to. Direct Operator Connect. I'll go ahead.
No, so there was a point in time where if you wanted to run what's intercept like media, for instance, so contact center overlays for Teams interface, or receptionist console overlays for Teams, that required direct routing versus Operator Connect. Has that changed, or does that still push you into direct routing?
No. So some of that has moved into Operator Connect now, but early on, and that's the other component was connecting other physical things, right? Like there was no way to connect to direct Operator Connect initially. There was because Teams didn't have a way to connect analog devices. So you come to an organization like G12, we connect analog devices via SIP or via our cloud PBX, and that's how we would do it. And we tied to Teams on the back end, right? Not in Teams natively. So exactly right though. When it comes to if it's media intercept, or if you're looking at deploying the door actuators or some sort of analog infrastructure, you would need that. If you were a school and you were tying in Informacast, right? You needed a way to tie in, an Informacast platform into your system, right? So all those physical things that are on site that are complex, right? Those things required direct routing at the time. More and more, you're seeing, as an example, the platforms come out. So our platform is an example that ties into Operator Connect. On its own, has its own cluster of SBCs that it controls. And so what that does is I can deliver services, tied to a Teams infrastructure, but not in Teams, outside of Teams on the back end with these SBCs. So if I go tie in Informacast, if I go tie in, other physical components, then I can do that, but it still stays within the infrastructure of my Team software. So it's visible to the client, right? So they can see, or to the customer, so they can see what components they have are being delivered via SIP or registered agents versus, inside Teams and Operator Connect. But more and more with Teams, with the Metaswitch acquisition, Teams is able to deploy, and bring in, more legacy solutions that are now being tied to Microsoft Teams in a way that works on top of the advanced stuff that they're doing for like Azure cloud services, right? Or Azure communication services, right? So there's a lot that's going on in that space, which is pretty interesting.
What are you seeing for DR and business continuity? There was definitely a period of time where the conversation got centered around, if Teams goes down, what do you do with your phone calls? And, that was one of the big value points for a direct routing partner, was the ability to actually take and deliver those calls to something else. Is this still something that is active and you guys are dealing with?
All the time. This is where we go, do you want UCaaS or do you want Teams? But even if you're in Teams as an example, because you hit my infrastructure and my software platform before I even send a call to Teams, right? You have the ability to redirect calls. And because we're a UCaaS provider, we often, in fact, we did a financial firm they're like 600 or 700 users, but they had turrets, or they had these,
the bullets, the turret systems.
they had lines that needed to stay open and all that good stuff. They're like, so we can't go down, but we don't want UCaaS plus Teams. We want Microsoft Teams. And so you look at that and you go, well, I can put stuff on my UCaaS solution right here, or I can back it up with my UCaaS solution. So there's an amazing sort of job that my engineering team does, where basically I can go back up. Instead of going UCaaS plus Teams in this solution, what we did was we did Teams, but we built out a whole system for these organizations that were on our own native soft phones, our NetSapiens soft phones, essentially. So our native soft phones. So now, and they allow a ring down, if you will, from Teams to get to other devices, right? In the event there's a massive delay for some reason, right? So you get a 500 not found, or if you get a 404, it's not 404 is not found, or a 503 redirect, so you get those different errors, and I can send that call over to a soft phone that's available, right? And so it's a really weird solution where it's like, hey, we're going to rely on Teams because we really want to rely on Teams, because every CIO is saying, if you're not saying Zoom, which I don't know who says Zoom, but if you're a CIO and you're saying Teams, then you really want something that backs it up. And so that's what we kind of built that solution like that, to back up that. But yeah, I mean, that's it. Of course, we deal with it still. For like yesterday, what if Teams goes down?
It happens.
Again, I point to the SLAs that have been changed recently, right? I point to the yesterday was Microsoft's earnings call, and they added 5 million lines, and it's like they're larger than any UCaaS provider out there already, and there's a giant market. And guess what? The public, and I say the public, normal businesses don't even know yet that Microsoft is a phone system.
I want to phrase this carefully. How much of a threat is the EU to Microsoft and Teams right now?
Ooh, I don't know the answer to that. And in fact, I don't even have an opinion on that at all. Do you mean from an antitrust perspective, or?
So the EU has officially launched investigation for enforcement against Teams and Microsoft bundling of Teams with Office 365 and anti-competitive practices against, and the complainant was Slack in 2020. I think that they're using to lead this charge, but I have to imagine they're going to have other people that are interested in having an opinion against Microsoft bundling Teams, and Teams being part of Office 365 and yada, yada, yada.
I think the saving grace to that, and I really don't have an opinion, but if I'm thinking about it, I thought about antitrust just for a few weeks ago, because I did a video on, Microsoft Teams. I looked at it and go, I think Microsoft is going to own 60 to 65% of the business world voice communication platform, right? And I think Zoom will own 18 to 20%. And I think the rest will be, the 20% that's left over will be, the UCaaS providers that are still around, right? That want to operate independently in small markets, et cetera. So that was my thought. And I thought, well, the saving grace to that is that Microsoft Teams is building an ecosystem for people to deliver services, right? So they're building this ecosystem of, carriers in Operator Connect. And so I look at that and I go, that's not anti-competitive. That's inclusive. They're adding carriers all the time. There's a lot of carriers that want to be added into the ecosystem to deliver services. So in a way, they're not anti-competitive. Now, the bundling of Teams, it's part of their software solution, right? So I get that, but they're allowing other people to other organizations to compete and take a piece of the revenue piece. They're not saying I'm doing the dial tone, because obviously we know that Microsoft does their own calling plan, and organizations can pick Microsoft as the carrier, but
all you have to do is try to port numbers once on Microsoft with Microsoft, and never want to deal with Microsoft again. I mean, we had a port. We did it just out of curiosity. We started a port. I think Microsoft officially terminated the porting process at like 5 or 6 months.
Wow.
I mean, I have this somewhere where I had like a log of time where we started the port, and it was hilarious. I mean, it was And this is not what we do. It's like, if you get new numbers allocated, it was phenomenal. It's like you just click and you turn on. But I wouldn't try to port numbers with Microsoft, especially since it's not like you call like 1-800 Microsoft phone porting support. Right. It was just an email interaction.
And that's what makes from an ecosystem, an Operator Connect ecosystem. That's what makes it. Okay for customers, because you look at guys like us that have been in the CLEC world since 2006, right? And some of the people that we brought over from 360 Networks were our original porting team. That they've been doing this for 15 years, right? So we tell everyone we port numbers in 5 business days, and so people are just, what, 5-7 days? What do you need? It's just that's our expertise. So I can appreciate that. Like, they're building a phone system and they're doing it from I wouldn't say from the ground up, but they built a phone system that they thought addressed the market. I think some of the things were ahead of their time a little bit, and now they're going back and they're facilitating some of the features that needed to be added that have been used since before voicemail was available. Right. I mean, that's a lot of the phone features that we use today are features that were deployed before phone service or before voicemail was a thing. And so you go back and you pick up some of those features, yet the advancement of their feature platform is pretty darn good. But yeah, I don't know what the threat is from an EU perspective, but I have to think that the ability for these Operator Connect providers to come in and provide services around the Microsoft phone system is going to be
So Slack is interesting as a complainant in the sense that they're not offering phone service. There's no phone system, service overlay with Slack. I mean, this is pure chat, right? So, who knows? We'll see where this goes.
It'll be interesting for sure.
I mean, going back to early 2000s and even like early 2010s, there was a lot of value in going through the process of becoming a multi-state CLEC and, getting feature group D trunks everywhere. And, there was a big price and cost advantage to doing that. Is that still the case today? I mean, did you go through the process of, CLEC registrations with G12
or we did this at 360 Networks and we thought to ourselves, why in the world would anyone do this? It's ridiculously difficult and time consuming and expensive. Why would anyone do this? And so we looked at that and just, I mean, now particularly, it used to be advantageous whenever there was a lot of switched access to be had. So that's carrier to carrier compensation, right? So if your callers called toll-free numbers, they were on your network and they called it toll-free, you get to bill the toll-free carrier, a little fraction of a penny or whatever it is, right? But the amount of volume starts to rack up the more users you have on your platform. That's why the free conference call stuff was a big thing at the time.
Recip comp
on the
huge.
inbound, so it was recip comp and switched access. So on the inbound side, it was the switched access. So you look at those two things, or reciprocal compensation on the inbound and switched access on the outbound. So you look at those two things and you could create a revenue model just based on the traffic, right? And that's what free conference call did. Put an app out there, music calling, all sorts of different apps that were on a CLEC that they shared revenue with the CLECs, in rural areas. And they drove up that, the cost basis for those things for the carriers. So we looked at all this stuff and we thought, we don't even as an organization do least cost routing. Right, because it's just not worth doing. Let me have 25 carriers, and then let me get the cheapest one, so I can deliver a call that may have questionable quality. Look, we're delivering services to hospitals, states, cities, counties. Like important businesses here. And it's like So we just so we have major kind of LD providers on the back end of G12, right, and we have all sorts of 27 SIP trunk connections to different people and some fiber. And we have actually 10 gigs into Microsoft Teams. So we have to, part of the Operator Connect platform is that you have to be securely connected to Microsoft to be compliant. And so we've got a really robust infrastructure, but no, not necessarily for CLEC registration and all that good stuff. We don't want any part of that.
So the last, I'm so refreshed to hear that you're not doing LCR. The last platform that we built to do LCR when we were doing wholesale voice. I mean, this is like a decade ago. And we were doing, you had to do 7-digit depth, right? So MPA and XXY, 3 jurisdictions. So intra-inter and undeterminate, right? So then all of a sudden you have 1.5 million routes per jurisdiction. So, each carrier had 4.5 million routes in a database. And then you go out and you're like, okay, great. Like you said, you have 27, 30, 35, whatever the different quantity is, right? And all of a sudden you're like, okay, we have 60 million routing combination options in this thing that has to like process instantaneously in order for, now the technology was amazing. I mean, we were able to do it, but maintaining that nightmare was a nightmare.
Or troubleshooting. Or troubleshooting like that. At the end of the day, we chose quality over savings like that, and it's just like we just don't have those issues, right? And you look at that stuff and you go, why would you even do that as a carrier?
So SIP trunking, the launch of SIP trunking was really, most operators were really pushing channels until you got to wholesale, and then it went from wholesale to minutes, and there were always different billing games around like how the minutes were staged and charged and what the billing increments were. And there were different ways to like suss out some margins of profit, right, in the business model. What do you think happens with Microsoft Teams? I mean, are you seeing people switching from a named user model from Teams for voice into a per minute basis? Do you think that's going to happen, or is it going to kind of, where do you think this is going?
It'll be, I think the carrier, we'll call it carriage. My friends in Australia call it carriage, right? So we'll call it carriage for just a second. That piece will ultimately, there is, it'll get down to a usage model, right? Take an organization that has, 3,000 users. Take a university, right? That's a good example. University. They've got 3,000 users. They have 100 of the users that actually use a system, on a regular basis from a dial tone perspective. And they've got, 300 or 400 classroom phones that are barely used, but they need dial tone connectivity attached to them. We have, we're addressing this right now where we have basically, you pay $1, it's $1 a user, and then a per minute fee in and out. Right. So we're doing that today. So it's like you've got our model that you've got unlimited in and out, US and Canada, and you've got usage, in and out, flat rated, here you go. And it's to address that exact, sentiment. So I think at some point, what you'll see is organizations will get to a point where they're comfortable. So if they get to, I think what you have to look at is look at from their context, right? We're in this business, so we have a little, our knowledge, our depth of knowledge is several layers down, right? But if you look at an organization and they're coming off of legacy TDM and they are coming off of a Cisco, platform, and they're used to paying all these different fees. And now they've got two fees to pay. They've got Microsoft licensing to pay for their phone system, and they've got Operator Connect per user as an example, right? You look at that and the savings are pretty significant. They don't need to address it anymore. They can leave it there for 3 to 5 years and be happy campers, right?
Yep.
Which
it's also easy. It's simple. You don't have to deal with anything, simple. Right? Like it's just
Yeah. And then there's the organizations that take the small biz that are really cost conscious right now, and maybe they were using a Ring or an 8 or somebody, and now they can go say $8 a user, and if I go buy $1 seat from G12 plus usage, my cost may be down because I barely use the phone. I'm a software development firm, so I barely use the phone. So so it's funny, we see I would say it's I think 15 to 18%. Maybe just under 20% actually take the dollar usage service that we have, dollar plus usage. They take that option because they feel like they barely use the phone. In some instances, they realize quickly that they should have taken the unlimited version and not that one. And we'll move them to the unlimited at that point because there was a school district or a university, I can't remember which one it was, that ended up like shooting over what they thought, like $10,000 over what they expected. And I'm like, guys, we should just move you to the right plan. Okay. And they're like, okay, sorry about that. Thank you for taking that off. And just, so it works for some. Where literally they have a $12 bill. You know what I mean? And so I'm like fortunate that we only send out bills via email, right? So you got a $12 bill in this one, and then you've got the overage over here. So you get the gamut with it. But yeah, I think it's all going to go that way at some point. Europe's a good example, right? Europe is they've adapted really well to the per minute model from the carriers, almost exclusively now. right? So there's not this bundled in package that we do here in the U.S. In Europe, they're used to paying for usage, So I think in from a telephony perspective, they're oftentimes ahead of the U.S. in the direction of where we're going, right? And I think they see a lot of that today, and I think at some point we'll see the same thing.
So, in order to be a Microsoft Direct Routing partner or to be a Microsoft Operator Connect partner, right, you have to go through, you have to jump through the Microsoft hoops, right? You have to have your interconnects, you have to have a certified SBC, you have to have, there's a bunch of stuff you have to do. And as you've said, right, Microsoft, of course, is building on this ecosystem. There's a lot of logos now. If you go to the Operator Connect page, there's a lot of different companies that are offering this service. Some have native hardware, some are using third party. I mean, there's a whole, mishmash of stuff that's actually going on, like I said, when you start peeling back the onion a little bit, but, this question is like really twofold. Like, as an end user, how do you pick? And the second half of that becomes, why G12, right? So, like how do people navigate this buying decision after they've decided that they want to go into Teams and they know that Microsoft isn't the right company to provide the dial tone?
It's interesting. I often wonder how we get picked in Operator Connect too, because we're just if you sort by U.S. carriers, we're one of 15 or 16 carriers that are in the U.S. right. And then some of the ones that are provided services in the U.S. are European-based companies that just provide U.S. dial tone, right? So you look at those and you eliminate. There's probably 7 or 8, maybe 9 carriers that you could actually choose here in the U.S. that you do go, okay, that's a carrier for me. And you go pick the logo and you add them, and every one of them, nearly all of them. There's a few of us out there that are a bit progressive in how we let people come into the system before they do anything. If you go and you submit to the queries that people are asking, like, okay, choose us, right? I'm not going to use any names, but they say choose us. Mm-hmm. The next thing you get is a form. Contact us, you know what I mean? And you fill out the form. And on that form, it says, how many users do you have? And you say, I've got 75 users. You'll be lucky if you get a call back in 2 weeks, a week. You know what I mean? So I think as people go through the progression of people not contacting them, right? They'll
cream rises to the top.
Realize exactly. So I think that's a big one. And the name recognition, obviously, people look at take there's an AT&T in there as an example. Mm-hmm. The reality is that organizations need help understanding how to connect dial tone to Microsoft Teams. We make it as easy as possible. You could go in and start a free trial. We walk you through the process. We've got a series of emails that come out to you where you go, or say, don't forget to do this. Here's something that you need to do. Here's the instruction, to do it, step by step. So, and we give them full control over taking down test DIDs, and they can be calling. We say you can be calling in 15 minutes, right? Start your process and be calling in 15 minutes. The reality is that even though we're probably the easiest provider out there to turn on, right? People still need help understanding what this looks like. And then not only that, people still don't understand what the capabilities of Microsoft Teams Phone is, right? And so I often say this is an analogy that I'm like, and I'm pitching to everyone. Basically, we're like the tires on a Ferrari, right? Like the Operator Connect is stuff. It's like I see everyone advertising Operator Connect, and I love it because I'm going, who the hell's calling for Operator Connect? Like, seriously, there's like a handful of Microsoft partners that know what we're talking about when we say Operator Connect. The customer sure as heck doesn't know what Operator Connect is. So we're marketing Microsoft Teams Phone, right? And the tires come with the Ferrari, right? Here you go. Like here, you're buying the Ferrari. We'll give you the tires. You need them to roll around in it, don't you? So that's my analogy. So we're pitching Microsoft Teams Phone to customers, and we're letting them know what we can do. So our team is knowledgeable in Teams, and that is why I look at organizations like I'm just going to pick on AT&T because they're the largest out there. You look at AT&T, and AT&T is likely not going to provide you, and I don't know this, I'm just guessing, that they're not going to provide you Teams support as an example, just to help get you up and running and tell you, hey, yeah, Teams can do this, this, and this, and this, that. Right? Like I said, you're lucky if you get a call back, much less let me help you understand what Teams can do. If you don't have a Microsoft partner, sure, we'll help you. Otherwise, your Microsoft partner can help you build this, and we'll give you the dial tone, or we'll help you do it as well.
I think the comment there, the expansion to that thought is sometimes organizations are looking for other organizations of a similar size or appearance, and then they understand each other, right? So like if you're talking to if you're a Fortune 100, it's easier to work with other Fortune 100s for certain things because just the way that your bureaucracy works lines up with their bureaucracy, and like the two bureaucracies can kind of like figure things out with each other. And it's hard to get outside of that world sometimes. And, and there's also, we do a lot of business with AT&T. And one of the negatives with AT&T is if you've ever had, or we'll make an easier target. Let's pick on the cable companies for a moment. We do a lot of business with cable companies. They're fantastic. We do have a ton of fiber deployed with cable. I mean, these organizations are amazing at installing. I mean, they're really good at installing service, right? But the average person has experience with a cable company because they had a cable modem in their house with god-awful service that was terrible and horrible support cycles. And so then when you start talking to them about doing business with a cable company, they like lose their mind. Like, the cable company's awful. Why would I do business with them? And you're like, no. Your residential service with your cable modem at a $60 a month service was terrible. But like this other thing over here that you actually want for your business is amazing. You know? I'm like, go use this thing over here.
It's true. I mean, and that's their wheelhouse, right? Like that's their wheelhouse. They do a really good job at that.
Yeah. It's, so now, and this is something I'm just curious, right? Because you see this at a bigger scale. Microsoft did something incredible with Teams, which was dictate the user experience on physical devices, right? So Teams phones, go out and buy any phone from anybody. I mean, they commoditize the hardware just the same way they did with Windows. It has the Teams interface on the phone. So Polycom, Yealink, whatever, Grand Street. I mean, go down the list, right? Audio codes. It is still Teams on the phone. They don't look different. Outside of like, you talk about hospitals or classrooms with a phone on the wall for a common station. Are you seeing a lot of deployment of physical phones for knowledge workers? I mean, is this there's some cool phones out there too. I mean, some of these things are really slick, but I mean, what percentage of companies are actually still on a physical device versus just saying, heck, use your soft phone on your computer?
So the reality is that organizations still have to cater to a generation that likes phones, that likes a physical device, right? And so, but they are reluctant. So if you talk to the IT teams of organizations, they are reluctant to deploy phones. They don't want to deploy phones because it's something else they have to manage. However, in every deployment, nearly every deployment, there is a small percentage of devices that are still deployed, right? And I say it's small. It's actually pretty small. So if I go to 1,000 user organization, they're going to deploy about 80 to 100 phones, right? So about 10% hardware is still being deployed into some organizations. And it's an exercise now because they actually will go take polls in the organization, right? They're like, okay, who wants a physical phone, and do you really need a physical phone? So that's kind of our experience in the deployment process these days. So outside of your government agency that's got physical devices set up in different ways. So those organizations and hospitals, as an example, those ones are still deploying a larger amount of devices, physical devices. But the normal business is about, I would say, 10% of their users are deploying devices. And then the bigger facility you get, right? So the hospitals and things like that, the more physical devices they're deploying. But we're seeing even universities as an example, deploy more soft phones than anything else, hands down. And they're not, phone in the classroom is now on your PC. Yeah, that's your phone in the classroom.
So earlier prediction that you gave was 60% of market on Microsoft Teams, 20% on Zoom, 20% everything else, right? And there's a lot of consolidation action, layoffs recently. I mean, layoffs have hit everybody, but there's a lot of motion with like the traditional UCaaS companies of what's actually going on with them. When you look, it's been expected for a while with this like UCaaS race to zero and consolidation of UCaaS, which seems like it's getting ready to start. Like there's going to be some kind of frenzy of acquisition and merger activity going on. And then there was this big push into direct routing, of course, because there's this huge land grab and opportunity with Microsoft Teams coming online. And now, of course, that's turned into Operator Connect, and the Operator Connect partner portal is getting really busy. At what point does the same happen there? I mean, not everybody can operate, Operator Connect at scale and be good at it, right? What kind of cycle do you think we're on, and how long before we start seeing it go? I mean, I would expect if it's 15 right now, it's probably going to balloon to 30, right? But then, how long does it take for us to get to that point, and then how long does it take for it to contract back
Interesting.
down?
Okay, there's a lot of components in there that I get excited about to talk, because I've got some strong opinions when it comes to some of this stuff, right? I look at traditional UCaaS. If you're a traditional UCaaS provider, not a collaboration provider, I look at that and I say, you probably have a good 5 to 8 years to operate, 5 to 7 years to operate and be okay being independent and being a UCaaS provider. The likelihood is you'll probably lose customers, and and you'll have to struggle to keep up with your growth if there is growth. On the Microsoft Teams side, and it's because we know Microsoft. I know the person who runs, the Operator Connect infrastructure, right, or program. Mm-hmm. And you look at that, and what I'm sort of predicting, or when I talk about, let's say AT&T, difficult to get a call from as an example, right? When you fill out a form to get Operator Connect, even Microsoft sees that in the way that the nimble nature of a smaller organization is easier for them to pull into the system, because there is some software development that goes into doing it. It's not just let me bolt some things on and turn the lights on. It just doesn't happen that way. There's Microsoft has their process of things to go through, and it's not easy, and it's not certainly not cheap, and it's not easy. And if you don't have an organization that's really focused on it, it could take a year to do it or 2 years to do it. It's just, and so I look at that and I go, I think, UCaaS, certainly has a run. UCaaS plus Teams has a pretty decent run ahead of it. And then the Operator Connect is just in its infancy, right? The direct routing was really not even in the carrier space. It was really the partner space, right? That the direct routing was a thing. And now Operator Connect is, the carrier space that gets to do this. And I think because it is a complex thing to go turn a customer on, it's going to take, Teams Operator Connect. It's going to take that another 3 years before that hits, before it hits its stride. And everyone's just like, okay, let's just go get you some numbers in Teams and let's go pick your provider. And it's super simple for everyone. And everyone's on board from a software perspective to easily activate numbers and easily port numbers, right? I look at it and go, where I stand, I've got probably a 3-year head start on everybody, right? Just because of the product set that we offer combined with the support that we offer. And so I look at that and go, we're well ahead of everyone, and it's because we are our nimble nature. So there is some time frames. I think I don't know that the Operator Connect side is going to, if it run a cycle. I don't think it's going to run a cycle. I think you're going to see that Operator Connect is going to hit its stride from a growth perspective and hit that hockey stick in 3 years. And I think it's going to continue on for 5 to 7 years, and that before it reaches, call it saturation. Right. Here's I'll leave you with this thought. I'll not leave you with this thought, but here's my thinking behind this is that we have never had, since the 96 breakup of the organizations, anyone that could successfully roll up the business space with a ubiquitous product. Right. It's been fragmented since the very beginning. Large organizations, small organizations, the different offerings, it's been completely fragmented, which is great. It's created a competitive landscape for everyone. Okay. But the market now, this is my belief, is really ready for some sort of, I'm not going to call it consolidation, because there's still all the underlying providers that are providing services, right? That give it their unique spin like we do. But the market, I think, is really interested in some ubiquitous way to connect and collaborate. And that's what Microsoft Teams is able to deliver, this ubiquitous way that a large number of portion of the organizations can connect. But here's the other cool thing. Everyone wants to get rid of the PSTN anyway, right? Nobody wants the PSTN. And even the carriers, AT&T, let's turn off all this stuff. It's just a heavy infrastructure to operate. So if you look at Microsoft Teams and you go, okay, now there's a personal Teams. If you have personal teams, right now you've got personal teams and you've got, businesses with teams. How is that person going to connect? It's not going to be through the PSTN. So a lot of that connectivity becomes instant connectivity to organizations and businesses, right? And individuals. So you look at that and you go, that's going to be a massive, now mobile phones are being laid, right? Microsoft Teams mobile. That's an instant connection into your organization, right? Now, so I look at that and go, Microsoft's going to have a really good hand in the communication space. Apologies. And I think it's going to be really game changing for the communication space.
So in that argument, I don't disagree with anything that you're saying here. In this argument, I see two companies on the sidelines that are strange to me, right? And Google bought Ground Central, eons ago, and created Google Voice, and for all intents and purposes have done absolutely nothing with that product. I don't even know if they have a percentage of the market, deployed on Google Voice at this point. And the other one that's really surprising to me is Slack. Because Slack has a huge install base, probably in part because Google Workspace never really had a unified chat. So I don't really feel like there's gonna be a lot of Windows environments running Slack instead of Teams, right? It's kind of like that migration has either happened or is happening. So now your Slack exists because Google hasn't really figured out chat in any meaningful way, but now it's entrenched. So does Slack ever come out? Probably not. It's almost too far gone. But does Google get serious with voice at some point? I don't know. And or does Slack, at this point, does Slack go out and buy somebody and become a voice company overnight and make it run at, Teams and Teams Voice? It kind of feels like they have to if they want to be competitive in this space. If you look at what Teams is bundled, imagine that conversation's happening somewhere at some level. You would think it is, right?
It has to, but Slack's owned by Salesforce though now, isn't it? Right? So it's like you have an organization that's not their bag, right? Collaboration is just not in their wheelhouse. It's not their core. And so you look at Slack and you're like, okay, great. We've got this, this chat platform where we keep everybody connected, but not really, right? And collaboration, the meeting space, turned out to be the real winner in this stuff, right? Teams and Zoom and the embedded base of they each have several hundred million users, 200 or 300 million users each, right? Of embedded base of users, and you look at that and you do see that the drive down, from a PSTN perspective usage, because we're connected and we're mostly operating from scheduled meetings now, right? If there's not very many phone calls I take that are just ad hoc unless it's on my cell phone, right? Slack, I think Slack could come out with a platform, right? I think they could, and they'd have a large embedded base of users to go after, albeit I would say smaller organizations, but it'd be a great opportunity for them to pull in a real telephony organization to go embed, calling and have a calling platform that help those organizations deploy, because that will be the competitive landscape at that point. Google is interesting because, I know Craig Walker, he's the founder of Grand Central and now Dialpad as an example. And I sold them voice services a long time ago, right, at 360 Networks. And so you look at that and you go, well, I don't understand why they didn't do anything with it. I fully expected Google to acquire Dialpad, at the time, because Dialpad was, they sold Grand Central into Google. And then I think when deployed, it was called Switch.co, I think is what it was called, or SwitchCo or something like that early on. And he had Uber Conference, I think is another one that he had, and then kind of rolled it all into Dialpad. And Dialpad was a company that he had sold originally the name to Yahoo, so he was brought in to do it. Anyway, so I look at that and I go, are they just going to acquire Dialpad at some point? But I don't know, because I don't see an offering from Google that's going to go compete in the space, and probably not at the level of Teams, because there's, I don't know very many organizations that are significant in size that operate in a Google business environment. Now, schools certainly do, right? And then small business, I'll call it the micro business. They quite a bit, right? Slack, Google, Zoom, those are their platforms, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about like age of the organization and industry, right? So tech companies, internet companies are going to be Google Workspace almost exclusively. Anything that was started in the last decade, probably Google Workspace over Office 365, unless, older founders, can't get rid of Outlook, right? And which is, Excel. Like Excel is the drug that you can never get off of. Once you're hooked on Excel, it's just impossible to get off of Excel. And it just... Salesforce, the Slack acquisition is really interesting. And Salesforce came out recently and had some numbers that weren't great. And, the stock wasn't very happy. The market wasn't happy with them. And what they were really showing was they weren't getting a crossover between existing Salesforce clients, Salesforce customers, and Slack. They haven't been able to cross-sell Slack into a Salesforce install base yet. And, I don't know what they're going to have to do in order to change that, because, Salesforce had its own, messaging with Chatter. It's not great, but they had it. And, organizations, if they already have Teams, displacing Teams with Slack, good luck, right? So it's I don't know. It's like as much as some of this feels like it's already set in stone, it's so much of it still feels very much up in the air of what could happen. And that's kind of the next sort of, I think it's the next stage of competitiveness, right? Because if, again, you got the UCaaS guys here, fighting it out right now with Teams as an example, and Zoom, from the collaboration space. But now you look at this and you go, if Slack could get that sort of, that embedded base to adopt some sort of collaboration that they put out. So just, it's funny because you said that, because I was just thinking of that when we first started, we were a Slack organization and Zoom, right? So we're Slack and Zoom. Mm-hmm. So you look at that and you go, why do you have to have two platforms? So if you're Google, Slack, and Zoom, if you're an engineering firm or a newly founded company, you're three sort of vendors in, right? You're Google, Slack, and Zoom. That's your combination right there. It's exactly what Teams offers, all in one thing. And I'll tell you, when we went to Slack, or we went to Teams from Slack, we hated Teams initially, right? Because Slack is such a good communication chat platform. It's so clean, it's so easy, it's so organized, right? It's just a good experience. And then you get into Teams and you have to get used to Teams. And then once you understand it and get used to it, then you go, oh, it's a good platform. I like it because it's integrated with everything that I do. And that's where Slack and Zoom and Google, just don't have a product to appease everyone. Now Zoom does, obviously. I consider Zoom a good competitor to Teams. But yeah, you look at that, there's just not a good way to bring those things together just yet, right? So, coming out of the SIP wholesale business, I would say that you've got a leg up on a lot of people, in the sense that you've probably been through a lot of pain already related to, like anybody that was running, LCR at some point had somebody, find some route that they could abuse and shove a lot of traffic down. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, my cost versus my, sell, does what happened to me here this month, right? And, there were a lot of really big, BKs in the world of, operators, early 2000s that had this happen to them, just because they just, people could take advantage of it. But, Teams imposes, and Operator Connect imposes a very different cost structure, for an organization. Still good margin, but just, absolute revenue is much lower, and I look at these UCaaS companies pushing into Teams native environments where, let's say they were advertising a $40 per month seat cost. We know that they were really selling that probably for like $12 or $15, right? So, but going from that down into, what their licensed seat cost is on top of Teams. Especially public companies want top line revenue growth, not top line revenue decline. And I kind of expect this is going to create some very interesting pressure. And I'm curious how you think about this too. Because if starting from SIP, from a wholesale SIP basis, you're not like eating your own revenue to go into Teams. You're just changing, the category it's coming from.
Yeah, they're going to have a really hard time. I think when I say they, I don't put myself in the UCaaS only category because we're at this inflection point where we're really kind of, both. We kind of dance on both lines right now, and I can see the future. It's going to be, on this side quite heavily. But they're going to have a really tough time. Number one, money was cheap, right? So top line revenue is easy because if money is cheap and top line revenue is the goal, I can throw a bunch of money at this and go scale my top line revenue and not worry about making any money. I mean, has RingCentral made any money yet? I don't think they have. And so you look at this and you go, they're going to have a really hard time. They're feeling that right now. They're feeling the pain right now. What they haven't felt yet is the decline in growth and the pressure that the pricing pressure that they're going to experience in the near future, right? They haven't felt that just yet, which is why, there's rumors of acquisition, in the UCaaS space of big players, right? So I don't need to mention who they are, but there's that going on, and that's because, money's no longer cheap. You can't scale at the level you want to scale anymore. You're going to see massive pressure, and your values of your organization is going to be completely depressed. Right. And again, you haven't even come up against the churn that's going to happen yet, because there is going to be churn. I can tell you right now, I don't know the exact percentage, but a decent number of the people coming to us for Operator Connect are coming off of a UCaaS provider, 3 UCaaS providers that they're coming off of right now. And and you look at that and you go, that's a very telling sign to me. It's not just, they're not coming just from legacy PBX organizations. They're coming from UCaaS providers. And so they haven't experienced the churn yet. And they have not experienced the pricing pressures that they're going to see just yet. That will ultimately, if they don't adjust, lead to churn. So that is going to be an interesting, so they're going to get hammered in the marketplace for it for sure. And that's what's going to drive this consolidation that you're going to see over the next 6 to 8 months. You'll see this consolidation start to happen. 2 or 3 acquisitions will happen that are going to be seismic in the space. So yeah.
We could talk about this for days, but it's, I think if you really want to get into this, you get on Seeking Alpha message boards and make your predictions and, stake your bets, right? Yeah, I think the one was coded like strategic acquisition, and you're reading that and you're like, no, that is buy the company, fire everybody, shut down the platform, and do a forced migration of whoever's left, and hope that you get over a certain percentage of the enterprises just to stick with you, as opposed to fleeing somewhere else when this all goes down. Rick, any last words or thoughts, or
No, I appreciate you guys having us and walking through G12 a little bit, the market in general. This is I'd love to talk about the space. It's not very many of us get to go to our wives or significant others and have this kind of a discussion. so this is great to sit here and have a discussion like this. And but no, it's it's an interesting space right now. Operator Connect and Teams is just it's a force to be reckoned with. It's a great opportunity for carriers to be a part of the Microsoft ecosystem, and it's a great opportunity for customers to realize really, really robust solutions that make their life so much easier. And I think it's a great opportunity for them, and particularly in 2023, it's a great opportunity for them to drive cost savings into their organization. So, I appreciate you having us on. And if people want to chat with us and work with us, that's great. We'd love to chat with you and help deliver services to your customers and to your to the end users.
Awesome. Rick, thank you very much.
Max, it's been a pleasure. Have a good day.